DJ PK, it's 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. We're joined now by Steve Cleveland, former BYU basketball coach. Steve, good morning.
Good morning, fellas.
Steve, we don't usually talk a lot of football with you, but coaching doesn't change that much from sport to sport. So I think we have a couple of questions after everything we've seen happen with Kyle Whittingham. When you've been one place a long time, like you were at BYU, and then you pick up and move to Fresno State, new president, new AD, new fan base, no boosters, nothing you've done really matters. They're more worried about the storyline of their team. They're not so much worried about that. Even though you were going home and Kyle is not going home to Michigan, was there a little bit of culture shock having to start over at that point in your career?
You know, I think culture shock is a pretty good way to put it, to be honest with you. I mean, I knew kind of what I was getting into, and I think we always feel like hope springs eternal, and we can fix this, we can fix that. It was a challenging time in my life in terms of coaching and just all the issues around our program. I think Kyle's in a situation which is significantly different in that, you know, he's gone to a blue chip program in Michigan, and you know, I couldn't be happier for the guy. I mean, he was so committed to Utah. He ends up stepping away. I don't know what his intentions were when he stepped away, but stepping into that Michigan job has to be a thrill of a lifetime for him and his family and everybody involved. And I'm excited to watch him play.
When you took over at BYU, you know, I was a beat writer at the time, and everybody knew the program literally was in the worst shape that it had ever been. And so if you did anything that had any modicum of success that first year, it would be considered a successful year, which is exactly what you did, being able to, if I remember correctly, get to it was a bloated whack, and you had to qualify to get to the conference tournament, and you got all that there. Well, now with Kyle going to Michigan in a very real way, I think it amps up the pressure on a guy like Morgan Scalley, who's one of the better human beings that I've ever been around. But now, man, the spotlight was always going to be intense. Now, with Kyle still coaching, we're going to have at least a look and see what Michigan's doing. How do you handle pressure? Because I can recall talking to you multiple times. The pressure that you felt to win was enormous. And now you were trying to build a program. Now you got somebody, if they win their bowl game, which we expect they will have 11 wins, be 11-2, and expect to continue that. That's a high standard. Plus, you know, in a figurative way, with Whittingham looking over his shoulder from Michigan.
Yeah, you know, I'm sure, first of all, these guys are really good friends. They've worked together. You know, they've been around each other for a long time. There's pressure that comes. I mean, obviously with Kyle, you know, it's a huge cue. I mean, going to Michigan, coaching there, I think that Kyle will have to transition and he'll have to adjust. And I was just looking at some of the player in the transfer portal things that immediately jump out when a coach leaves and a coach takes a new job. And I suspect that there'll be some of those Utah guys that may be at Michigan here in the next week or two or a month. But it is challenging. And I think that for Kyle, he's prepared. He's done everything in Utah that he could do. And I think with Coach Scalley, yes, there will be some adjustments. But he spent a long time with Kyle. And they had a system, and I'm sure he'll tweak some things, and there'll be some different approaches to how he's going to do it versus when Kyle was there. But for the most part, Utah is on pretty solid ground. Now, what ends up happening is, you know, I'm looking at 5 guys at Utah that may just hit the transfer portal and be at Michigan in a week or two. And so, you know, you're talking about Daly and Danner and Ficklin and Buchanan and John Hall. These are all 5 or 6 guys that have to make decisions. Do I go into the portal? Do I follow coach? Does Michigan want me? So there are a lot of unanswered questions, but I suspect that there'll be a few people from Utah that might join Kyle. And I don't know a lot about Michigan's program other than they're a blue blood program. They've been very successful over the years, and I can't imagine Kyle not embracing this and taking it to a level that maybe they've never been to. Who knows what will happen? But I know in the transition, when you take over jobs, and you have a transfer portal, and you have situations where people are coming and going, and then you have other issues in terms of recruiting new athletes and guys that you have recruited, maybe that are freshmen or that have committed, and then all of a sudden changes are made. So there's a lot of turbulence right now at Michigan as well as at Utah, but maybe more so at Utah. But Coach Scally is awesome, and I've known him and watched him. I'm excited for him. There'll be adjustments, and if Kyle ends up taking 4 or 5 of the better players from Utah, it'll make his job even more difficult. But I have trust and faith in that guy, man. I've been around him. I've watched him. I'm happy for him and his family.
I think Morgan should go get some of the last cuts from NFL training camps. That'd be my suggestion. Seems to be working in college basketball. Can you believe that guys who played in the G League and guys who've been drafted or guys who are in Europe or joining teams mid-season, go get yourself a pro? What are you recruiting high school kids for?
Yeah, I mean that culture and that environment has really changed, and you'd be foolish not to. You got to look at the portal. You got to look at transfers. You got to look at all of these things, and I don't know who's going to stay on the Utah staff and who's coming and who's going, but I suspect that Coach Scally, as a football coach, or even in a basketball program, teams change. You can change things really quickly with the transfer portal and having opportunities to kind of poach a player here, poach a player there, and change things in your program. And I think when you start looking at basketball, and I see what's happening there in the Big 12, and watching what's happened at BYU and the rebuilding job that's going on at Utah. Everybody is having a different experience, and right now it feels really good to be part of the BYU football program or part of the BYU basketball team. Things are there, whereas at Utah there's some change, and there's going to be rebuilding, and they're going to have to be working the portal and recruiting, and the Utah job situation is going to be much more difficult than what we've seen in BYU and how they've made their adjustments and made the transfer portal work for them, as well as really tapping into it's an international sport, and it's more so for basketball maybe than football, obviously. But between the portal and international recruits and finding guys that are third-year guys that maybe basketball that have been at wherever. If they were at Weber State, and all of a sudden this guy has a chance to maybe jump into a program because there was a need there. So there is a lot of change going on. It's going to be fun to watch. I'm excited about seeing where Coach Scally goes and what he does and how he can get that football program, maintain it, and deal with transfer portal issues and those kinds of things. And I love what I'm seeing in terms of basketball, in terms of BYU and how they're using the portal and how they're bringing international players in. They're building that thing for the long-term success.
I don't know if you saw that Baylor is getting a guy who was actually drafted, and he's on their roster now. And Baylor's coach Drew saying, "Well, I mean, there are no rules, and so we find a way." And BYU adds a kid who did some G League stuff, so they're assumed professionals. Tom Izzo, I don't know if you heard that, but he went off on that, and he's a statesman now of the game.
Oh yeah,
he has such credentials and has the authority and the credibility to speak on these things. And so it seems like from the college basketball perspective, there are literally no rules. You can get guys who have been drafted. It used to be, you put your name in, that's it, you're done. Well, now none of that matters. And you're getting and we didn't really, and they did it to a degree with the European guys, and we weren't really sure how that played out, but we trusted the NCAA. But now when we see guys being drafted into the NBA and then going back to college, it seems crazy. And Izzo speaking out against that. And, you know, you're not that much older than what Tom Izzo is, obviously. So there's a connection there. And it seems like if he's worried about it, what is the future of this game regarding guys who are being professionally paid and then still being able to come back to college?
Yeah, you know what? I have tried to wrap my head around this whole thing, and at times it just feels like everything's out of control, you know, and there's so much change, and you know, in terms of what's happening from one school to another, and whether it's, you know, increased scholarship money or, you know, whatever the finances are, you know, here locally, we know that you have two basketball programs where at Utah we're rebuilding and changing, and it's a hard thing to go through, but it's not as hard as it would have been 5 or 10 years ago, when you can get to a transfer portal, when you can get to Europe, when you can get, you know, the world is your playground in terms of sport. And so you can fix programs, you can rebuild programs quicker than when you had to just go through the process of recruiting high school kids or recruiting JUCO kids and players and getting those guys in. It's much easier to change the environment of a program now than it's ever been, because of the portal, because of money, significant money that is being used to lure players to come and transfer and come be a part of our program. And you know, we don't have the statistics and things now, but it'll be interesting 5 years from now or 10 years from now to go back and look and just see what trended here, what happened here, and how has this played out, and what changes are being made. Right now, we're in the midst of a hurricane, and everything is going every which way. And it's kind of fun to watch from the outside. I mean, it's if you're a college basketball fan, there's a lot of change. I think one of the things about BYU right now is that obviously, you know, with Devonsa and Saunders and Wright, Kennard Davis, you got guys here that, you know, except for Richie, we're not a part of the program, and yet obviously that staff has done a wonderful job finding players locally, internationally, transfers in every which way. G League, I don't think it's called the G League anymore, but we're recruiting young men from Europe and bringing them over who've been being paid. And I don't think the being paid thing it should be much of an issue anymore. Everybody's getting paid, and that's the rules, and that's how it plays out. And because of that, we're going to see a lot of change and a lot of transfers and a lot of different scenarios in terms of building a program and sustaining a program. And I used to think, you know, in my lifetime as a coach, I wanted everything to be sustainable. I had control. We had control as a staff. We knew what kind of players we were looking for. And now the sustainability has a whole different look. And that teams can change from one year to the next, even in-season change transfers. So we'll have to keep a close eye on it. You know, I think here locally we're fortunate to have, you know, the NBA presence here. We're fortunate to have Utah and BYU and all the other local colleges, Weber State and Utah State. I mean, this is a great state to live in terms of basketball. There have been great coaches, wonderful players, and great success. So we're not going to change this thing. It's not going away. It's interesting to watch, and I'm sure there'll be a little bit of heartache, but for the most part, there's a real upside to this for coaches who can quickly change the environment of a program and rebuild. It's not going to take 2 or 3 years like it took us at BYU, where you go through 1, 2, 3, 4. It took us 4 years to get back to the tournament and win a conference championship. You can do this now in a matter of months.
Steve, we appreciate it as always. Thanks for joining us. We will talk to you again next week.
Thanks, fellas. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Steve Cleveland, former BYU basketball coach, joining us. Yogi Roth will join us, talk Big Ten football, and Kyle Whittingham at Michigan. That's coming up at 9 o'clock. DJ and PK, it's 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.